So what's going on here? Well, long story short, they find massive evidence that a huge heat blast from the sky at about 25 degrees above the horizon incinerated these twin cities on the Jordanian side of the river,
What?
just north of the Dead Sea. Yeah, and they have the artifacts to prove it.
And again, the reason it has to be from the sky?
The Bible is self-attesting and is self-consistent. I love it when God, in his ultimate wisdom, gives us these archaeological evidences, these evidential proofs to demonstrate the truths of Scripture. Check this out. This is really cool.
About things like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sodom and Gomorrah. That is one of the most sensational stories.
Sum it up for those
recent
who
history.
Yeah. Not as aware as they should be.
Yes. Okay. I mean, so Sodom and Gomorrah, it looks like one of those mythological stories out of the Bible, right? Oh yeah, sure. Fire comes from heaven. Yeah. Tell me another one. And I'll be honest with you, Matt, when I was growing up and, reading Genesis 19 and stuff like that, it was a challenge to my faith. I'm like, okay, come on, really?
Now, for those of you who may not know, Sodom and Gomorrah were a couple of sinful locations in the Bible, as he mentioned in the book of Genesis, where they were just inundated with sinful activities and rebellion from God, where God actually judged these nations. And he judged these nations by calling down fire from the sky to destroy them. So let that paint a little bit of a picture of what we're going to get into here in a second.
Oh, this really happened, or are we supposed to understand this? Something else. But, several years ago now, maybe like 15 years ago, I was at the Society of Biblical Literature, which was being held in that year in San Francisco. And I was in one of these, conference rooms, and I just wandered into this session because it had an intriguing title, something about archaeological discoveries at Tel El Hammam in Jordan. I thought, well, I'll walk into this, because a lot of these conferences at the Society of Biblical Literature, like these ideologically driven, post-colonial, feminist, whatever, interpretation of this, that, or the other thing. So I like to go to ones that are actually about language or history or something. Somebody actually dug something up and we're talking about data, So this archaeological session I wander in, I start listening. And as I'm listening to this presentation for about 45 minutes, near the end of it, I began to realize, oh my gosh, these people presenting think that they have found the biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what they're saying in a really roundabout, really understated way. So at the end of the presentation, they stop the presentation and they open up for questions, and they describe these two city mounds of the Jordanian side of Jordan River, and in this destruction layer and so on. And so I raised my hand immediately and I said, well, did you find any arrowheads? The reason I asked that, Matt, is when you have a destruction layer of an ancient city, if you find arrowheads in the destruction layer, it means that an army caused the destruction and they were shooting arrows at the defenders and blah, 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 blah. If you find a destruction layer and there aren't arrowheads, that means an army did not destroy the city, and then probably it was some kind of natural event.
Very good question to ask if we want to understand what happened, and it's reasonable. And check out how this question leads into what they ultimately found.
Right? So I'm curious, what destroyed these two cities that you guys think are Sodom and Gomorrah? And so the researcher starts to get very bashful when I ask this question. He says, well, I didn't really want to go there, but all I want to say while we're recording this session is that it was a heat event. And there's like 20 other people in the room.
Now, me personally, that already gives me chills, especially as a believer. The Bible states clearly that God called fire down from heaven and fire destroyed that city. And so if that wasn't true, one of the first things that you would be able to see, or you would think, and I know time and when it comes to archaeological evidence, things could be eroded and lost. There's no doubt about it. But if that wasn't what happened, it would probably be easy to figure out. So, I mean, just hearing that alone gave me chills.
We're like looking at each other like a heat event. Like, is that like a wardrobe malfunction? Like, what is a heat event? Like, okay. And then he stopped the recording and like the official session was over, and so it was like off camera at this point. So all of us in the room, like, mobbed the guy at the front, like, okay, tell us what's going on. And so this researcher, Stephen Collins he's from a Southwestern university in the U.S. here. He says, okay, So we get down to this destruction layer of this city that we're beginning to think is Sodom, and we pulled up a piece of pottery, and when I looked on one side of it, I thought, oh no, our research is ruined, because I saw that it was glazed. And glazing wasn't invented until the Ottoman period, or at least the kind of glazing that he thought he saw. And the Ottoman period is like 1000 AD. And if you're pulling that up, that means you've got contamination in your archaeological dig. You got like later artifacts down there. But then he turned the pottery over, and on the back of it, it was typical Bronze Age pottery, but it was glazed on one side and not on the other. Like, what on earth is going on? So, make a long story short, he sends this away to a lab in the U.S. and for testing, and they come back and say, well, that glazing is trinitite. Okay, great. What's trinitite? Well, trinitite is that glass layer that you get when you basically set off an atomic bomb in the desert, and it melts the glass. And
That's wild. Yeah, I'm tripping over here. I really am. That's so dang cool that they were able to determine what went down there, at least to some degree, that there was some. Now, of course, the skeptic would say, well, it doesn't necessarily mean it was supernatural. And you know what? That's a legitimate argument you may have. But considering the statements of scripture and everything that we know, that specific location, it does make for a pretty solid case.
you get a kind of crystalline formation that's called trinitite. So this pottery was raised to, like, oh my gosh, this is what's going on. So they continue to bring up this glazed pottery, and eventually what they discover is, among other things, they also begin to find human remains. They find human skeletons that are complete up until about halfway up the backbone, and then there's just a scorch mark, and there's nothing on the top of the body. And they find the skeleton behind a wall that's about 4 feet high. So what's going on here? Well, long story short, they find massive evidence that a huge heat blast from the sky at about 25 degrees above the horizon incinerated these twin cities on the Jordanian side of the river, just north of the Dead Sea. Yeah. And they have the artifacts to prove it.
And again, the reason it has to be from the sky?
What's that?
The reason it had to be from above
because of the angle. Like, they have these human remains that apparently were standing upright behind a wall, and everything above the wall was incinerated, and they do like the angular calculations, and they can see, oh, that blast was coming like this, so they can calculate the angle at which, and the stuff when they find the stuff in situ, and they've got a scorched side or a melted side, again, they can triangulate where this was coming from. And so, long story short, from a natural material explanation, this looks like a meteor blast.
That's what I was about to ask. What was the naturalistic explanation?
Yeah.
Now, what I would have asked was there any kind of volcanic activity around that area? Because it may be possible, maybe some lava flowing or falling, just in an attempt to head off the atheistic or the secular or the skeptical claims. I would have asked that out of curiosity.
I think it was called Siberia back in the 1800s. There were square miles of taiga, northern Russian forest, and so on. And when a meteor comes into the atmosphere, it heats up and then explodes, and it can be like an atomic blast. But again, the timing and the location and the cities all track with what is described of Abraham and Lot in Genesis 19 and the surrounding chapters. And then the Bible talks a lot about Sodom and Gomorrah for centuries thereafter, all the way into the prophets, like Isaiah and Jeremiah continue to mention Sodom and Gomorrah. This stuck in the cultural memory because this was a major world historical traumatic event for us, like the two towers going down, like this major disaster where these two cities were entirely wiped out by a heat blast from the sky, by the hand of God, as it were. But no historical source records this, even though Sodom and Gomorrah were arguably the two most powerful cities in that entire region. They were at a trade route, from going from east to the west, from Egypt out to the Far East, and everything was passing through there. So very powerful, very wealthy cities, and only the biblical record has a historical account of this meteorological, geological event that we can now attest that tracks with the time period and the description. And also that blast going up creates a great vacuum, which then recollapses and pulls all kinds of salt sediment from the Dead Sea and then slams it on.
Salt sediment. And if you know anything about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Lot's wife turned around, when they were told not to look back, but she turned around and then she was turned into a pillar of salt. Who knows how that went down?
On that location that was in the bullseye of, and that's where you get, the discussion of, became a pillar of salt and all the hellfire, the brimstone, that was all torn up by the blast and redeposited over the cities. So it's absolutely fascinating. If folks can look this up, I'm not making this up. Steve Collins, a very reputable archaeologist from something like Southwestern Methodist University or something like this. You can look online, just go to Amazon and type in the discovery of Sodom and Gomorrah in his book. I forget the exact title.
It says on it.
But you can find it and put a link to it.
Wow.
And that really changed my perspective on the Old Testament, Matt, because what it pointed out to me is things that sounded too outlandish to be history that even I, as a believer, was attempted to discount, suddenly and sensationally shown to be, actually that's a historical event.
Yeah, I think sometimes we could be influenced by our naturalistic culture where we don't see miracles on a regular basis. And even I tell people this all the time, the Bible covers a period of a few thousand years, and there really aren't that many miraculous events that take place. So it's not like a miracle occurred every single day throughout the centuries during the biblical period. They still were pretty rare when you look at the amount of time covered. But yet at the same time, those of us who are believers, we have to always remember, and I've said this on multiple occasions, we have to understand who is in charge, who's running the show. The all-powerful, supernatural, omnipresent, omniscient God of the universe interacting in human history. Him calling fire down from the heavens, or him making an axe handle float, or raising a man from the dead, or walking on water is not that big a deal. He spoke the universe into existence, for goodness sake. So keep that in mind whenever you're challenged by the skeptic or the atheist, whomever it may be. Who is our starting point? Who is our foundation? It is God. It is Yahweh. That is our starting point with everything. So these difficult, miraculous events that may initially be hard to understand or difficult or a challenge aren't really that big of a deal when we have the right framework. But let me know what you think. Comment down below. But before you go, make sure you check out this video right here. I think you'll find it very helpful.